Hi guys, I told you I'd make a video to show you some of the things you could use to paint your pottery at home. So this is that video. I have 4 pieces here. This is the little flower that I made that makes that little ting ting ting, so we know it is bisque fired and ready for us to play with. This is just a little pinch pot that I drew a little flower inside of. This also, ting 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 ting. Our lovely little fishy fish, and just another little pinch bowl that I shaped into a heart. So let me show you what materials I have. I do have watercolors, and I have a little bit of water here and a little paintbrush to show you what that'll do. I also have some oil pastels. Hold on a second and I'll open that so you can see them. Crayons would work too, but they are harder than oil pastels. Oil pastels are a little bit softer, so they're gonna color a little bit easier, and the color is gonna be a little bit brighter and thicker. And then, of course, I have markers. You could use Sharpies if you wanted to. I will say that with the markers, any kind of marker, when you're coloring with it, the clay is, it's a terracotta type form with the bisqueware, so it's gonna suck up the moisture, and you'll see that with the watercolors especially. So it's gonna dry out the tip of your marker pretty quickly, so you're gonna need to let your marker sit and recharge, basically, and do it in stages. So we'll start with watercolors because that's probably what most of you are going to want to use. I have a piece of newsprint here, so I am painting on newsprint. So make sure you have something down on the table to protect your table. If you have newspaper, that'll work, magazine paper, anything that's going to protect your paper or your table. We do not want to ruin tables. So this is my little heart, and I am dipping my paintbrush in water. I press the excess water off on the side, and then I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to grab some red, and I'm going to paint with that red. Ooh, sorry, there you go. This is a fun way to paint. So I'm just painting on the inside. It's actually not drying too quickly, which is good, but it does dry rather fast. See that? Not as fast as I thought it would. All right, so there we go. You can see that a little bit. Probably be easier if I do the outside too, so you can see that. So one thing that you will have to do, no matter what you use when you are coloring your pottery in, you are going to need to spray it with something after it's dried so that it doesn't rub off. Because what happens with all of these, any of the moisture that's in any of these tools, in the case of watercolors and markers, it's water. In the case of oil pastels, it's oil-based color. That is going to soak into the clay. And when it soaks into the clay, it leaves behind the powder or the residue from the color pigment. And that will rub off if you don't spray it with a fixative. And you can get a Mod Podge spray at Walmart or at Michael's, Hobby Lobby. I don't know if there's one around here. Jerry's Artorama has really good fixatives. That's out in Virginia Beach. You could go there and check them out. But I would suggest you go to like Michael's or Walmart and just get a real inexpensive fixative there. And Mod Podge has one, and it's a spray, and you can just spray it on there. And it's kind of like a glue, like a spray-on glue, which you could paint over top of this with glue too. But when you paint over top of it, once it's dried, it tends to pick that color back up off of it. And we don't necessarily want to do that. We want the color to stay in place. So that's why I recommend a spray fixative, because it doesn't really re-wet that color and start either pulling it off or moving it around. All right, so I did half of this heart in the watercolor. So I'm going to put that to the side, and I'm going to grab markers. So this lid wasn't all the way on, so I don't know how well it's going to work. Let me see if I can move a little bit closer. And we're gonna just start coloring here with the marker. So this side is watercolor, this side is marker, and this is actually pretty bright right now. But as you can see, I think I told you guys this when we were doing a project with Sharpies. Once they start getting used a while, you have to turn. If you notice, I'm actually turning my marker so that I'm using a different side of the tip. And this is a bumpy surface, so I'm kind of having to do that anyway. To get into some of the little nooks and crannies. But that color so far is pretty comparable to the watercolors. So if you don't have watercolors, if you don't have access to watercolors, if your family is like, nope, not using watercolors, that's just a little too messy and we just don't have the space to accommodate them, markers works really well. This is looking really good. Again, just make sure whatever you finish it with that you want to put a fixative on it. Guys, these are not food safe. They are not liquid safe. If you put liquid in these, the liquid is going to end up seeping out of it and taking all of your color, all of your pretty color with it. Even with that spray, it will eventually, if you put liquids in it, it will eventually wear it down. So these are absolutely decorative pieces. Please do not use these for any type of food or drinks. That's just not advisable. As cute as this is, I would not put my little M&Ms in it and eat my little M&Ms out of it. However, I would put my little rings or my little necklaces or my little beaded bracelets actually that I'm wearing would fit in here nicely. So you could do something like that. So markers take a little bit longer than watercolors, but absolutely, definitely a great result. Definitely worth taking the time. It's going to be hard to see. It does chew up the tip of the marker. So you may want to, you can see it right there a little bit. You may want to use older markers, ones that you're okay with throwing away when you're done, messing up the tip of them. Don't use your brand new ones. If you have older ones, use those first, okay? That way you're not going to be sad if you completely destroy the tip and can't use it for coloring any fine details in coloring books or anything else after that. All right, so fair warning. All right, so now that we have a comparison between watercolors and markers, there's our comparison, watercolors, markers. I want to show you oil pastels, just because I need to speed this along, since clearly it takes a little bit longer to use the marker than it does to use the watercolor. But I really, really like, those are really close, guys. Hold on, let me get this inside done. Okay, I told you I need to move on, and now I'm saying, wait. All right, that's really close. This is the marker side. This is the watercolor side. That's pretty cool. All right, so I'm gonna have to label that on the back before I forget. This is watercolors, W for watercolors. Let me put a line under that. M for markers. I had to put lines so that I know which way is the right side up, because if I turned it upside down, it could say watercolors and markers, and we would get really confused. All right, so watercolors, markers. Watercolors, markers. Really close, really great. We're gonna set those aside, and those dry really fast. All right, now we have our cutie little fishy here. And we're gonna play around with the oil pastels. So oil pastels come pretty thick. Most of them are gonna be about this size. They might be a little bit smaller, but they're not usually. So that, if we have really tiny areas, is gonna be a problem, because you're not gonna be able to get into small details very well. But I'm going to show you how this looks when we color. So the cool thing about this, though, is that we could do a combination of oil pastels and watercolors, or oil pastels and markers. Oil pastels are a little bit messy. I gotta stand up to color at this angle so that you guys can see while I'm coloring what's happening. All right, so we're just coloring in the inside here real quick. Alrighty. Well, that's fun and happy and all kinds of, I don't know if there are pink fish out there, but you know, it's a bright, cheerful color. So we're gonna go with it. I'm gonna do yellow on the fins. Just right on the top here. So this is actually going to be really cool. I think you guys are going to like this a lot. So oil pastels do a really good job coloring on top of it. We kind of learned that, those of us who used oil pastels on our falcons, on our cardboard earlier this year. They're great at putting down some really nice bright color that also shows up the texture of the surface that we're coloring on. So I'm going to stop there. Great color, looks awesome. Now, check this out. Watercolors. We'll use watercolors first. Let me rinse out my brush. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to grab some orange. And I'm going to paint right over top of what I just colored. And this creates this really cool texture because the oil pastels, they're an oil-based material. So the water is going to run away from the oil-based pastel, and that pink is still going to pop out. But then that orange paint, that orange watercolor paint, is going to settle into the spaces that were not filled in due to the size of the oil pastel crayon that we used. Again, oil pastels, if you don't have them at home but you want to play around with them, you can get them at Walmart. You can, actually, I don't know. I don't think I saw them at the Dollar General last time I was in there looking at what art supplies they had. But you can get them at Walmart. You should be able to get them at Target. You can actually probably find them at the grocery store in the arts and crafts and school supplies aisle. Depending on the grocery store you go into. But look at that. Isn't that cool? This is probably not the clearest shot, but it is coolio looking. And now we're going to play with, I'm going to use this neon orange for the little fins. And I'm going to do the same exact thing that I did with the watercolors, except I'm going to do it with the markers. And I actually think I like the marker a little bit better because it also has parts of the clay still. Okay, but if you know me, you know that I like to turn markers into watercolors. So I can color in every surface that I want with the marker. And the marker tip is kind of like the oil pastel tip in that I have some pieces here on the tail and the fins that I drew lines that kind of carve in. So the marker is not, and the oil pastel is not going to get into those little fine lines. So if I don't want those fine lines to look white with the marker, then what I can do is I can use a wet paintbrush. Actually, you could probably do this with a Q-tip too, if you have Q-tips by. And you can wet them, and you can just kind of run it right along that surface that you colored in with the marker. And it will fill out, or fill in, it'll take that marker and fill in those cracks with the water. The water will. It'll move it around the surface. All right, so I redid the rim with this neon orange, and it is actually a little bit darker than what's inside, the orange that's inside that's dried out. Let me get this, I kind of think I like the markers better, guys. I'm not gonna lie. And I'm gonna grab this little paintbrush that I have here in a second, as soon as I get this colored in, and show you what will happen if I wet the marker that I color with water. We're gonna see what happens. I think it'll be fun. Okay, it'll be fun, because when is it not fun to experiment? All right. So we got this pretty much done. Again, see, remember I told you it will kind of, ceramics are pretty rough. And so this tip actually picked up some of the oil pastel, which is common. So I can use my surface of my paper that I'm kind of working on top of to wipe off the tip of my marker and clean it off. But it also does kind of mess up and rough up the tip of your marker. So as long as you're okay with not having a perfectly clean and sharp tip on your marker, then you'll be fine on this. All right, so water, paintbrush, apply it to the marker. Hold on, let me move my paper a little bit closer so I don't make a mess on my table. So here on this bottom one, I'm gonna rub it along. Ew, it's looking dirty. Okay, maybe this isn't working quite as well. Let's see. We'll see. We'll play around with it some more. I can always do another layer if I need to. Actually, it might need to wait until it dries to see what's happening. So I think, actually, you might not want to do this because it looks like the water is just kind of wiping the marker off a little bit. Okay, so if you look right here, there is still some marker there, but I think it just kind of cleaned it off a little bit on the tails. So there is a little bit of orange, but you mostly just see my bright yellow fins. So you may, if you really don't want the orange to be that light, you may not want to go that route of adding the water. So I'm just going to have to go back over it with the markers again to add that orange back so that it's that bright orange, neon orange that it was before. No big deal. That's an easy enough fix. I don't mind. That was a fun little experiment. So water on the marker on the clay kind of wipes the clay off and lightens it. So you probably don't want to do that. But hey, we wouldn't have known if we hadn't have tried, right? That's the best part. All right, so there's my cute little fishy. I'm gonna go back over it with another layer of marker just to brighten up those fins a little bit more with that neon orange. The inside with the watercolor on top of the pink is pretty cool. That orange actually made the pink oil pastel pop out and look really bright and almost kind of scaly, which is what fish are on the outside, scaly. So that was kind of fun. So those are 3 things that you may have at home that you can use. Crayons would work. They just aren't as soft as oil pastel, so you may have to color a little bit more and apply a little bit more pressure to get a brighter color out of them. I would not recommend colored pencils. Sharpies will work as well, but it does dry the Sharpies out pretty fast. I actually think that I prefer regular markers, water-based markers, to permanent Sharpie markers when I am drawing or coloring on clay. And again, Make sure you get a fixative, like a Mod Podge spray to spray on top of it. You don't want to do a paint on fixative because that could wipe off some of the paint, watercolor or marker that you have on there. And so you'll lose some of the brightness of your color if you use a paint on fixative. Get a spray on one. All right, that's really cute. It's really cute. Okay, again, watercolor, marker. So the watercolor is a little bit darker now that this is set to the side and dried a little bit, but I still really like them. They're really close. Yeah, that's really cool. All right, so that is it. Those are things that you may have around the house that you can use to paint and color in your pottery. Have fun. Experiment, play around with it, use more than one like I did. I did a combination of watercolors and markers and oil pastels on this one, and I did watercolor and marker on this one. So, and this was mainly just so you could see the difference between the two. So yeah, have fun, enjoy, bye.